So this is the first part of our three-part webinar series, and it is the Introduction to United Way Funding Policies, Procedures, and Eligibility. For those of you who are seasoned veterans, most of this information will not be new, but it is always a great refresher so that way you know exactly what your organization and program will go through as we enter into our funding cycle. Today's webinar content will include a brief history and background of our United Way, the staff and volunteer roles that provide our checks and balances system. We will then walk through the key policies and procedures at a very high level, I believe, a high level viewpoint, and we will provide you the pages so that way you can do a deep dive yourself. If there are questions throughout, I may be able to answer them, so please use the chat function. If not, we will have an opportunity for questions here at the end. For our brief history and background, so we are a part of the United Way Worldwide Network. United Way Worldwide is the national organization dedicated to leading the United Way movement, and it comprises of nearly 1,300 community-based United Way organizations. What is unique is how they provide support to us. So they provide professional development for staff, brand market and branding strategies, coordination of national and international companies. So if you think of Dr. Pepper Snapple or Pepsi or Coke or Staples or I don't know, any other company that doesn't have a headquarters here but does have a satellite branch here, they help coordinate those organizations for us. So we have the opportunity to engage their local employee base in order to help raise resources for the community fund. They also provide national research to us, and fun fact, they are a partner with the NFL. But unlike other national or international nonprofits, it is not a top-down organization. We are actually bottom-up. So we are completely locally autonomous from the national, international body. So each United Way is independent, separately incorporated, and governed by local volunteers. And this allows us to respond to the needs of our community. So if United Way Worldwide said, you know what, United Ways across the country and internationally, we're only going to focus on maternal and infant health outcomes, our United Way locally could say, well, does that apply? Do we have enough women and children or babies coming into this world to justify putting all of our resources into that basket? Or do we have other issues that are impacting our community in a deeper and more severe way so we can then align with them? And that is what our United Way does. And for example, United Way Worldwide really has us focused on education, financial stability, and health. And it doesn't necessarily address basic needs, but what we found in our community is that we still needed to have a presence in that space. And that kind of leads us to this strategic shifting. Our United Way started this shift to strategic impact, community impact in 1997. In 1997, the United Way Worldwide leadership were seeing a lot of change happening in the network, and they were seeing some United Ways be very successful and some United Ways not. And when they did the network-wide study, they found that the United Ways who were the most successful had put stakes in the ground around key issues in their community and were communicating about those issues with their donors. And this led to developing priorities and strategies for their community. However, they also had measurements, or called outcomes, in place in order to help prove whether or not their investment was moving the needle. And at that time in 1997, when we got our hands on that research here in Sangamon County, we were not in the place to take on that role. But the first thing our board of directors did was introduce in 2002 outcomes. So our community, we went from not measuring outcomes to the United Way building capacity of our nonprofit sector to be able to address outcomes and measure them appropriately, to then requiring that on some of our applications in 2002. To further that work, we then saw the creation of the continuum of learning. And while this webinar is for all of our issue areas, it is important to note that the continuum of learning really showed what our community could achieve when organizations came together to create a system or a series of goals for specific work. So they created goals around education or priority areas around education, and that work continues today. And you can see that our work under education is very much in line with that. And so as we see these networks develop in our community, it is our job as United Way to align with that work. And so when we entered into strategic planning in 2014, that was a big pillar of what we needed to do. We needed to turn outward and listen to our community partners and look at the research to see what should United Way in Sangamon and Menard County really be looking at doing. And that leads us to where we are today in basic needs, education, financial stability, and health. So before we dive into kind of the policies and the procedures, I want to make sure everyone knows who all interacts with this funding process. The most important group of volunteers is what we call our vision councils. Our volunteer vision councils develop the strategic investment plans of the United Way and continuously review those plans to ensure that we are doing what's best for our community. They are the ones who develop the requests for proposals, discuss the applications we receive, or I guess I should have said requests for applications. They're the ones who discuss the applications and develop a series of questions for those programs, and they're the ones who engage in program interviews. They deliberate and provide funding recommendations to the United Way Board of Directors, and are also the ones who are really geared towards shaping and guiding our work in our issue areas. They consist of between 8 to 13 volunteers who are experts, have lived experience, have research experience, or have work experience within their category that they serve. Our Community Impact Investment Committee, they are a committee of the Board of Directors, and they are the ones who do site visits when new organizations come on board. This is not a mandatory process, but there are times when new organizations may approach us that we need to get to know better. And so our Community Impact Investment Committee will be the team of volunteers that help us do that. They are the ones who are also responsible for the policy and procedure development. So they are in charge of this whole process and how it really unfolds. They are also the oversight over our vision councils. And so everything that the vision councils do is first given to our Community Impact Investment Committee for review before it is forwarded to our Board of Directors. And they are also the ones who determine the eligibility criteria for this process. Our financial review team, otherwise known currently as our finance committee at United Way, they are the ones who are absolutely the final say on determining eligibility, and their recommendation is forwarded to our Board of Directors. The one nuance here is that United Way staff, we are the ones who are going through your 990s, your audits, and the documentation that we have requested for our organization financial review process. But we forward all of those summaries to the financial review team in order for them to make their final decision. And they might have additional questions. They are the ones who are CPAs and accountants and know what questions to be asking, so we can ensure that our investment are going to strong nonprofits in our community. Then the United Way Board of Directors, they are the ones who have management and oversight over absolutely every single activity that happens here at United Way, including this process. And then last but certainly not least, the United Way staff do play a role in this process. We are primarily responsible for supporting volunteers, administering the process, making sure all sides are heard during the process, which really comes down to sometimes being the devil's advocate. So if an application comes to us and the volunteers are overwhelmingly negative, it is the United Way staff's job to provide something positive, and vice versa, in the opposite viewpoint, just to ensure that, again, all sides are being heard during the process. We are also responsible for upholding the policies and procedures as outlined by the Community Impact Investment Committee. And the last thing is that everyone should know is we do not vote in this process. Because we do not vote, we are absolutely there to support our applicants, which I think is a unique service that our United Way does provide, unlike other funders. And we'll talk about more of that support later on. And as you can see here, most of these volunteer and role descriptions and the staff role description can be found on page 7 through 9 in the Community Impact Policies and Procedures document. So now diving into the community fund process. The first thing is the grant orientation, which you are attending part 1 of 3 parts for our grant orientation. This is absolutely optional. However, we have a lot of data to support that organizations that do attend training are better off than organizations who do not attend training. So first off, thank you for being here today, and also congratulations, you're on your way to providing a really good application already. Then we have our eligibility determination, and we're going to go into that more on the next couple of slides. So I'm going to skip that for now. But the important thing to note is that date is November 22nd. So if you want to write that down, all of our documentation for eligibility and financial review is due November 22nd. That doesn't mean you have to wait till November 22nd. It just means that that's the final day. Then once you are cleared for eligibility, you are then granted access for the application. Those applications are due December 30th. However, once again, you don't have to wait. You actually have the application available to you already. You can start crafting those narrative responses as we speak. After the applications are submitted, it is then time for our volunteers to do what they do best. They begin to review the documentation separately and independently from one another. Within that review, they do develop scores for each applicant. At the first Vision Council meeting, the Vision Councils come together and they are reviewing the preliminary scores of all of the applications that are within their issue area. And then they have an initial discussion about whether or not they want to see that program move forward. If a program moves forward, they develop a series of questions for that program for a deeper understanding. If a program does not meet certain criteria, or say, if you're applying under education and we had $2 million in requests and we only have about $700,000 to allocate, they might start to screen applicants out early just to save them time and also save their time as they continue through this process if there wasn't great alignment. If a program is screened or if a program is moving forward, those notifications will be happening about a week after the first Vision Council meeting. And then questions are sent to programs, or screen letters are sent to programs prior to the program interview. And we'll dive into the program interviews again here in a little bit. Then after the program interviews, a third meeting of the Vision Council occurs. And this is when they are looking at the program interview, the pre and the post scores, because they do rescore the applications after the program interviews and the additional questions have been provided from the programs. And so at that third meeting, they then are looking at the final scores and the change of scores that occurred and are looking at ranking the programs within the panels, and they're preparing for funding recommendations for their meeting and also for the All Vision Council meeting. The All Vision Council meeting is when we start at whatever number we have allocable and we work our way to 0 across all of our issue areas. That is then the final recommendation that is forwarded to our board, and the board of directors this year will be meeting on May 26th. So the approval date of the board of directors is happening a little earlier than the prior years. So that's really exciting, and I know something that will help out a lot of programs as you're getting started. For a deeper review of the policies and procedures that are a part of this process, please review pages 11 through 13. And then last but certainly not least, at the end of the process, we always provide an opportunity for follow-up, and we call these feedback sessions. These feedback sessions are completely optional. We started providing pre and post scores with or without attending the feedback sessions. But if you do attend a feedback session, it just gives you an opportunity to really dialogue with the volunteers to say, hey, were there any concerns that we should be keeping an eye on even if we did receive funding? Or why didn't we receive funding? What really stuck out in your brain that was the deciding factor? So now talking about eligibility. What is eligible and what is ineligible? We're going to focus mostly on what's ineligible today. But again, you can have a deeper dive in the policies and procedures document on page 6. So programs from which previous grant compliance issues have not been addressed. If you are unsure if your organization or program have had previous grant compliance issues and they have not resolved them, please contact me and we will work through those issues. We have a responsibility of saving all that documentation so we can walk you through that process. And you can read more about this issue, the grant compliance issue, in the policies and procedures document. Applications requesting less than $5,000, because this process is not easy. And so if you are requesting only $5,000 or less, it's not really worth your time. Our average grant is around $30,000. Applications for political, religious, or programs requiring religious participation are not eligible. This does not mean religious organizations are not able to come to application. It just means that they cannot mandate religious participation in order to receive program services. So if Bible study is a part of their program model, as long as it is not forced or mandated in order for people to participate, it is absolutely okay. If it's provided but not required, it's okay. Applications for fundraising expenses or debt reduction. So we are not a gap filler. We are a program provider. Applications for funds to directly benefit a specific individual or family. So you can't write for the Smith family. Projects that were completed prior to the grant application. That's a no-brainer. These should be ongoing grants, because this is a grant is for 3 years. So these grants should be written for programs that are going to be around for at least 3 years. Private organizations whose sole purpose is to provide lobbying, environmental, religious, or fundraising activities. Organizations failing financial review protocols without proper cause or explanation. We'll talk a little bit more about this, but essentially, even if you fail one of our, say you have administrative percentage over 25%, our financial review team will ask you to explain that, and if your explanation is sufficient, they will still most likely move you forward. If it is not sufficient, then that's 2 strikes, and therefore you will not be eligible to move forward. But there's a lot of nuance in there, and that's why we entrust our financial review team to make those decisions, because they are the experts. Organizations that do not comply with all applicable laws, organizations that allow payments of commissions, finder's fees, percentages, bonuses, etc., etc. Organizations that conduct publicity or promotional activities which are not based upon the actual programs and operations of the organization, i.e. you're lying. That's not good. And then the last one is a long way of saying we cannot support things that are political or controversial. So what's required of our organization financial review process? An ACH form. This is, if it is not on file already with our United Way, we have to get one on file. This just helps us as we release the funding that you may or may not receive. So once we have it on file, then it makes it seamless just to tell our bank how much money to send you on the 15th of every month. The signed counterterrorism compliance form is an annual form you must complete, and it just states that you are not going to use any of the United Way money for terrorist activities. The IRS determination letter. This is not your sales tax exemption letter, so please make sure you are uploading the correct letter. The list of board of directors. We have a very specific template you need to use, and we will go over tomorrow at the second part of this webinar series. The bylaws with the date of a board approval, and it is always appreciated when you highlight the board approval date. Make sure it's first there, and second, highlight it just so we have an easier way of finding it. The IRS 990 are equivalent for the organization size. Make sure that you are submitting your signed copy. If you submit electronically, we need your signed electronic form. The most recent audit, again, this is equivalent to your organization size. So it might not be an audit, it might be a review, or it might be compilation, but it's based on your organization size. And the 990 and the audit need to be for the same year, and they cannot be older than 18 months of fiscal year end. And then, if applicable, if your regional or service area is greater than Sangamon and Menard counties, we need you to submit to us specifically statements for this area. Additional documentation for fiscal agents. So if you are applying on behalf of other nonprofits or as a collaboration, we must have an MOU or an MOA stating how that relationship is working. Are you reserving any fees? How are you cooperating or holding each other accountable, etc. But if you're not a nonprofit and you're not sure how you fit in, please give us a call, because we will work with you to determine what information needs to be submitted in order to apply. So going back a little bit to program interviews, just a couple of things that we want to make sure is clear. After the Vision Councils meet, there will be questions sent 3 weeks in advance of the interview date. 2 weeks are given to each program to provide time for crafting those responses, and then that gives our Vision Councils 1 week to review them. Once you're at the program interview, it's important to note that time is divided equally. We will never go above or below the time given unless it's absolutely just not necessary. And that is divided based on how many program applications we have. The style of the meeting is really open dialogue. It gets kicked off by our chair, but anyone can offer questions at any time. And then please, please, please do not bring any visual aids or handouts. They will specifically be requested if you need to bring them, but if you bring them and they were not requested, we do have to remove them from the room. And that just makes an awkward situation for everyone. And then last but certainly not least, if you have a collaboration you're applying with, the collaboration itself, you must have one representative from each collaborative applicant that is named in your application. No more than 3 though. So no more than 3 if you are applying by yourself, no more than 36 if you are applying with 12 other partners. And we have a very specific definition of collaboration, which we will get to at another webinar. If you are funded, we have our funding agreements. The first step is to agree upon deliverables. So if you do not receive full funding, we want to make sure you have time to modify your projections. So we are only holding you accountable to what is actually possible, not what it was promised during the application process. 2 signatures are required from your board chair and your CEO. Then at any point in time during the year or the 3-year process that we are engaged with you, there is an opportunity for modifications to happen to that funding agreement if you are not meeting deliverables or there are other issues we are finding with our Vision Councils. You can read more about that in the Community Investment Policies and Procedures document. Important to note, this is an annual contract that starts July 1, runs through June 30th. Then we will issue 2 additional years if everything is hunky-dory, but with one nuance that the money itself may fluctuate from year to year just because of campaign and/or program success. And then I believe this is our last slide today. So what can you expect after you receive funding? The first thing you'll do aside from signing that funding agreement is completing a 30-day report, which includes letting us know how is program service going? Are you getting it up and started? This is to ensure to our board that we've made an okay investment or we are flagging programs that are having an issue getting started. Namely pilots. You might take more than 30 days to get started if you aren't already in place. And then there's also a checklist you must complete that says, yes, we will run a good faith campaign. Here is our ECC person, our employee campaign coordinator. Here we are going to abide by communication and partnership guidelines, etc. You can read all about that in the funding agreement. Then after that, each 90 days of service is marked with a quarterly report. You provide your output and outcome data, and then at mid-year, in a success story, and at mid-year you provide updates on demographics and your budget. The annual report, this is a consolidated version of your quarterly reports. So you dedupe your numbers, provide us the final outputs and outcomes, the demographics, the budget, you name it, we want it, and a success story, as well as a programmatic success story. This is also an opportunity when you report any changes that are going to happen in the upcoming year. And then the last thing is, this is the time when we will initiate new funding agreements at the end of the year. So each June, you will receive a new funding agreement for signature, and also all of the reporting dates and all the reporting calendars that we have provided you already, they get updated every single June. So you will never know when things are not available. And so that is the end of our PowerPoint. And so are there any questions? We have about 10 minutes left, even though we are done with official time, but we have 10 minutes left of our webinar session if you have any questions for me. Yes, the community investment policies and procedures are available on our website. So if you go to springfieldunitedway.org And then I know that there's a banner, but I'm just clicking to it quickly. So when you go to this page, and this was in our funding release page, this is all of the documentation that you will possibly need for the application process. And you can see under each issue area, the community investment policies and procedures are provided. All right, everyone. Well, we are going to go ahead and close out the webinar. The recording will be available on November 12th. Hopefully, we will see you again tomorrow morning for part 2 of our 3-part webinar series. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day.